The house was eerily quiet that afternoon, the kind of silence that makes you notice the hum of the fridge or the birds singing outside. I sat alone in the living room, flipping through a magazine without really reading it. My husband, Daniel, was away on another business trip. I wasn't bothered, it was routine by now, but the emptiness felt more overwhelming than usual. I glanced at my phone, hoping for a message or call, but there was nothing. The silence highlighted how predictable my life had become. Routine had become a comfort, but also a barrier. I loved Daniel, or at least I thought I did, but over time, something had shifted. Passion had turned into comfort, and comfort had become complacency. The sound of a car door shutting broke the silence. I peeked through the window to see my nephew Ethan walking toward the house. He was Daniel's younger brother's son. I opened the door to find Ethan standing on the porch with a confident smile. "Hey, Ethan, what brings you here?" I asked, hiding my surprise. "Uncle Daniel asked me to pick up some documents he left behind," he replied, his eyes sparkling with charisma. "Hope it's not a bad time." I stepped aside, letting him in. "Not at all. Come on in." As he entered, I noticed how effortlessly he moved, bringing a burst of energy into the room. He tossed his bag onto the couch and glanced around. "Nice place, as always. You've got great taste, Auntie." I chuckled, dismissing the compliment. "Flattery won't get you out of trouble. What documents are you after?" Ethan shrugged. "Something about property papers, I think." As he headed to the study, I found myself reflecting on how different he was from Daniel. Ethan was spontaneous, charming, and unapologetically self-assured, traits that had been missing from my life for a long time. I shook off the thought, feeling a bit silly. He was family, after all. But then Ethan returned with the papers, his sleeves rolled up to reveal a tattoo on his forearm. Ethan caught me staring at his tattoo and smirked. "You like it?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "It's interesting," I replied, feeling a bit embarrassed. We sat down and chatted for a while, sharing stories and laughter. Ethan's tales were lively and humorous, a stark contrast to the monotony I'd grown accustomed to. For a moment, I forgot about everything else, my husband, my responsibilities, the unspoken rules of propriety. It was just Ethan and me, two people sharing a connection I couldn't quite define. Our conversation flowed naturally, filling the room with a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. Ethan leaned back on the couch, his eyes meeting mine a moment too long as he spoke. There was something about the way he listened, genuinely interested in every word I said, that was disarming, almost intoxicating. At one point, Ethan reached for the glass of water on the coffee table, and our hands accidentally touched. The contact was brief, but it left a lingering sensation in my mind. I instinctively pulled back, laughing it off, but I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "You okay?" Ethan asked, his voice trailing off as he studied me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. His tone was casual, but his eyes searched mine intently. "Of course," I said quickly, standing up to create some distance. "It's just warm in here, that's all." I busied myself in the kitchen, trying to shake off the tension, but I could sense Ethan's presence even from across the room. When I turned back, he was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame with effortless confidence. "You seem different today," he remarked, his voice softer. "Different how?" I tried to sound indifferent, but Ethan's words caught me off guard. "I don't know. Maybe more alive." There was sincerity in his tone that made it hard to dismiss as flattery. I felt seen in a way I hadn't in a long time, and it frightened me. "Ethan, you should probably go soon," I said finally, avoiding his gaze. "Why?" he asked, stepping closer. I quickly replied, "No reason. Just—" He pressed, his eyes locked onto mine, and I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but I couldn't bring myself to voice it. The air between us felt charged, heavy with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. Ethan was standing too close now, and I felt my resolve weakening. "This isn't right," I whispered, more to myself than to Ethan. "I know," he said, his voice low and steady. "But doesn't it feel right?" I looked up at him, my heart racing in my chest. For a moment, the rest of the world faded away. It was just the two of us, suspended in a moment that felt both impossible and inevitable. Ethan reached out, his hand brushing against mine. I didn't pull away. The room seemed to contract around us, the distance vanishing as if it had never been there. My mind screamed at me to stop, to step back, to consider the consequences, but I couldn't move. Just as the tension peaked, the sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. My heart leapt into my throat as Ethan and I quickly separated, both turning toward the noise. My nephew, Ethan's cousin, stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. "Hey," Ethan said slowly, his eyes darting between us. "Am I interrupting something?" "No, of course not," I replied, forcing a laugh that felt hollow even to me. Ethan was about to leave. He was just grabbing some papers for me. Ethan addressed his cousin with a casual grin. "Yeah, that's right." His cousin, Alex, raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. While I tried to compose myself, Ethan turned to leave, his eyes locking onto mine for a brief, charged moment. "Guess it's good timing then," Alex said, his voice neutral. "Uncle asked me to stop by and pick up the same papers." My stomach churned as I realized Ethan's excuse had been exposed. Alex's presence was a stark reminder of the line I had nearly crossed, and shame washed over me like a wave. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said quickly, desperate to regain control of the situation. "Ethan already has the documents. You don't need to be here." Alex didn't move, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Funny, he didn't mention you'd be here." Ethan shrugged, his easy demeanor unchanged. "I didn't think it mattered. We were just catching up. Nothing more." The words hung in the air, seemingly harmless on the surface but loaded with unspoken meaning. Alex seemed to sense it, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Well, I'll let you two continue," he said finally. His tone clipped as he turned and walked back out the door, leaving it slightly ajar behind him. The ensuing silence was overwhelming. Ethan looked at me, his expression unreadable.